What was ancient India really like? For one Chinese monk, secondhand stories weren't enough. He had to see it for himself. Faxian spent 14 years crossing scorching deserts, freezing mountains, and pirate-infested seas, all to reach the heart of Buddhism. What he found was breathtaking: vast monasteries, thousands of devoted monks, and sacred traditions unchanged for centuries. His writings became one of the most detailed records of ancient India. So, what did he see? What secrets did he uncover? This is the incredible story of Faxian, the monk who revealed ancient India to the world. The desert. Traveling west was a leap of faith. There were no guarantees, no safety nets, just pure determination and a deep devotion to Buddhism. The dream was reaching India, the heart of their faith, to bring back the sacred texts that could unlock deeper wisdom. But the road to enlightenment wasn't exactly paved with comfort. Faxian's journey took him straight into the desolate heart of Central Asia, where the landscape looked like something out of a nightmare. He later described it in chilling detail. In the desert were numerous evil spirits and scorching winds, causing death to anyone who would meet them. Above there were no birds, while on the ground there were no animals. One looked as far as one could in all directions for a path to cross, but there was none to choose. Only the dried bones of the dead served as indications. Sounds terrifying, right? And yet, he and his companions pressed on. Their next challenge was crossing the Gobi Desert, a vast and lifeless land that felt like another planet. Their destination was Shenzhen, but getting there meant walking 40 kilometers a day for 17 straight days, under a sun that felt like it was trying to roast them alive. Think about that. 40 kilometers a day on foot, through a desert where the heat came from above and below, burning their skin and draining their strength. Every step kicked up scalding sand, which stuck to their sweat-drenched bodies and filled their lungs. They had barely enough water to survive. No shade, no escape. Just the constant fear of collapsing and becoming another skeleton in the sand. But somehow they made it. After what felt like an eternity, they stumbled into Shenzhen, where Faxian found 4,000 Buddhist monks practicing the Hinayana tradition. The worst was behind them, at least for now. And that was just the beginning. If crossing the Gobi felt like walking through hell, wait till you hear what came next. Snowy mountains and rivers. After surviving the scorching nightmare of the Gobi, you'd think Faxian and his companions had earned a break. But nope, their next challenge was just as brutal, if not worse. Their journey took them to Khotan, a thriving oasis city and a major Buddhist hub in the southwest of the Gobi. For weary travelers, Khotan was a breath of fresh air, lush, spiritual, and full of life. But for Faxian, it was just a brief stop before heading into another battleground, this time against the merciless mountains. The Pamirs were next. And if the desert was an oven, the Pamirs were a deep freeze. The path they had to take was absolutely terrifying. Faxian described it in a way that sends shivers down your spine. The path was difficult and rocky and ran along a cliff extremely steep. The mountain itself was just one sheer wall of rock 8,000 feet high, and as one approached it, one became dizzy. If one wished to advance, there was no place for him to place his feet. Below was the Indus River. In former times, people had chiseled a path out of the rocks and distributed on the face of the cliff over 700 ladders for the descent. Yeah, 700 ladders, dangling over a cliff above a roaring river. One wrong step and it was over. Can you even imagine? And the worst part? That was just the beginning. After somehow making it across, they entered Udayana, modern-day Swat, northern Pakistan, a region where Buddhism flourished. But there was no time to admire the monasteries or soak in the culture, because the next part of the journey took them straight into the Karakoram Range, one of the most dangerous mountain ranges on Earth. This was no ordinary mountain trek. Faxian reported that the snow rests on them both winter and summer. The path was beyond treacherous, icy, narrow, and lined with cliffs waiting to claim the careless. Avalanches could strike at any moment, rockfalls were sudden and merciless, and the thick snow concealed deadly gaps beneath. Every step was a gamble. The cold seeped into their bones, their supplies were dwindling, and exhaustion was setting in. But they had no choice. Turning back was never an option. As if freezing temperatures, steep cliffs, and hidden dangers weren't enough, Faxian and his companions had one more thing to worry about: dragons. Yep, you heard that right. According to local belief, these weren't the fire-breathing dragons of legend, but something far worse. Venomous creatures that, when angered, could unleash deadly winds, blizzards, and storms of sand and gravel. Faxian himself recorded. Not 1 in 10,000 who encountered these dangers escaped with his life. And after everything they had been through, that number didn't seem like an exaggeration. The cold was relentless, biting through their clothes, draining what little strength they had left. The air grew thinner with every step, making breathing a battle in itself. Their bodies screamed for rest, but stopping meant freezing to death. And then the storm hit. Snow and gravel came crashing down on them with terrifying force, as if the very mountains had come alive to swallow them whole. For a moment, it seemed like this was the end. Buried, lost, just more nameless souls claimed by the Karakoram. But through sheer willpower, they dug themselves out and pushed forward. But even after surviving the storm, the mountains were merciless. One by one, Faxian lost his companions. At Peshawar, his dear friend Hui Ying fell ill and passed away. Another companion, Hui King, didn't make it past the freezing, wind-lashed passes on the way to Bannu in Punjab. The journey had already claimed so many, but Faxian refused to stop. Through grief, exhaustion, and the ghosts of those who had fallen, he kept going, step after step, until the towering mountains finally gave way to the open plains of Madura in central India. Finally in India. After surviving deadly deserts, freezing mountains, and storms that nearly buried them alive, the land ahead felt like an entirely different world. The hostility of nature faded, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, Faxian and his companions stepped into a place of peace and spiritual abundance, India. Here, Buddhism wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. In Madura, Faxian was awestruck. Gone was the eerie silence of the wilderness. Now the air buzzed with the hum of devotion, the chants of monks, the soft rustling of prayer wheels. Everywhere he looked, he saw Buddhism flourishing. There were many monks, all students of the way, he wrote. But what he found in Martello left him completely stunned. 20 monasteries, 3,000 monks. Kings, rulers, and common people alike poured their wealth and faith into these sacred spaces. Buddhism here was the heartbeat of society. Faxian marveled at how deeply the traditions had been preserved. The laws and ways according to which the kings presented their offerings when Buddha was in the world have been handed down to the present day. And this was only the beginning. In 402 CE, he reached northwestern India, visiting the great centers of Buddhist learning, Udayana, Gandhara, Peshawar, and Taxila, where knowledge flowed like a river, drawing scholars and monks from across the land. But despite all these wonders, his heart was set on one destination, eastern India, the land where Buddha himself had walked. This was the true goal of his pilgrimage. After a journey filled with unthinkable hardships, Faxian had finally arrived at the holiest places of his faith. The dangers, losses, and pain had all led to this. But his journey wasn't over yet. Now he had to bring the wisdom of India back home, journey back to China. After spending 2 years in Ceylon, Faxian's journey was far from over. His mission wasn't just to explore Buddhism. He needed to bring its sacred texts back to China. So in 413 AD, he set sail, embarking on one last perilous voyage across the pirate-infested waters of the Indian Ocean and the China Sea. And as if the universe wasn't done testing him, a massive hurricane struck. The ship was tossed around like a toy in a storm, and for a moment it seemed like Faxian's fate would mirror that of Jonah, swallowed by the sea, never to be seen again. But somehow, against all odds, the battered vessel made it to Sumatra. Here he stayed for 5 months. But unlike the Buddhist-rich lands he had visited before, Sumatra wasn't exactly a stronghold of Buddhist philosophy. The people weren't hostile, but talking about Buddha wasn't exactly fashionable. It was a different world. And then came the final leg of his journey, the voyage home to China. Faxian boarded a merchant ship bound for Guangzhou, thinking he had survived the worst of it. He was wrong. Another massive storm struck, sending waves crashing over the deck and threatening to sink the ship entirely. Among the passengers were some Brahmin merchants, and as the storm raged, they needed someone to blame. And who better than the lone Buddhist monk among them? They whispered among themselves, convinced that Faxian was bad luck, and decided that tossing him overboard was the only way to save themselves. But Faxian's patron wasn't having any of it. Furious, he threatened to report them to the Chinese emperor if they dared lay a hand on the monk. The merchants backed down, and in the end, Faxian survived yet another life-or-death moment. After more than 200 days at sea, he finally set foot in Chiang at the mouth of the Yangtze River. And most importantly, his collection of Buddhist texts had made it back with him completely intact. But Faxian wasn't just a traveler. He wasn't going to sit back and admire his hard-earned treasures. Instead of reuniting with his former teachers and companions, he immediately got to work, translating the sacred scriptures with the help of the Indian monk Buddhabandra. His translations would shape monastic Buddhism in China, preserving and spreading the teachings he had fought so hard to retrieve. And his journey? It became legendary. His detailed travelogue, Fogoji, a record of Buddhistic kingdoms, didn't just preserve Buddhist wisdom and captured a world long gone. Thanks to Faxian, we have one of the most valuable first-hand accounts of the Silk Road, both its land and maritime routes. More than just a monk, he was a bridge between worlds. And his story? It reminds us of what India was like several years ago. So, what do you think about Faxian's incredible journey? Do you think his account of ancient India gives us the full picture, or could there be even more we don't know? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this story fascinating, give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing historical journeys and insights.